The age scale of consciousness. This is Chris, Shores of an Infinity, with a video about the age scale of consciousness. This is the second and redacted version because the heirs of the inventor have complained to YouTube about copyright issues which are totally not apparent to me. The poor guy is probably turning around in his grave. But we will talk about it anyhow because the content is important, not the inventor or the finder of this scale. It's anyway just a scale, a model. It's a scale of consciousness from 0 to 1000. 200 is neutral, below 200 is negative stuff like fear, and above 200 towards 1000 is consciousness or enlightenment. The average of humanity being around 205 now. As Aurobindo and the mother and many other teachers have pointed out, something happened in the 20th century, especially in the second half of the 20th century, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that catapulted mankind from just below 200 to just above 200. And 200 is the level of courage. Below 200, there are all kinds of negative states, and the lowest three are fear, shame, and guilt. They will pull you down. That is also why Claire Graves in Spiral Dynamics said that from yellow onwards, there's no more fear and no more compulsion. Fear is really not conducive to any kind of spiritual, ongoing, abiding state. Nor is shame and guilt. As we can see now, in the last 2 years, first fear pulled down the masses into a negative state of consciousness, and now shame and guilt. The call for solidarity can also be misused as guilt-tripping and shaming. When beep calibrated humanity around 205, it was around the year 2000, and until 2 years ago, the general consciousness was on the rise. 210, 215. And then during the crisis, it dropped suddenly and then went back to around 210. Why? Because at the same time, while most people dropped slightly below 200, to many people something happened which we call awakening or enlightenment, and that evened the balance again. What I call awakening, the disidentification with your personality, can happen at 400, above 400, 400 plus on the scale. Usually for most people there's not much movement. They're around 205 or nowadays maybe 195 or 200. And then around their 20s, they find their balance, and that's where they will stay most of their lives. Maybe they move 5, 10, 15 points upwards, and that's it. Most gurus, success speakers, success coaches, manifestation teachers, they're around 300, usually around 270. 300 is what I call mini awakening. There are moments of awakening, but it's not abiding, it's not long lasting yet. But there's the willingness already to go with the flow. So many people who are in Spiral Dynamics second tier, yellow usually, they're around between 250 and 300. But also around 300 is reason. So you can also get to almost 400 by science and reason. And with science, I mean science in general, not just natural sciences. So philosophers, they're often between 300 and 400. But then something amazing happens at 400. At 400 plus, you suddenly realize that you are not your personality. And that is what is called awakening. Beep! Called this reason, but what is meant with it is, in Jed McKenna's terms, human adulthood starts here. That's where actual human adulthood starts. And that's where most people should be. 400 is where most people should be, but they're not. For some reason, they're around 210. Or recently below. But this will recuperate probably. Because the recent crisis has pushed many over the threshold of 400. Many people woke up because everything is so bizarre and absurd right now. So the first big step is 200. 200 is where the possibility arises, 200 plus, the possibility of consciousness and awakening, taking responsibility, enlightenment, and so on, is there. The possibility is there. Below 200, it's not even possible to wake up. It's not even possible to see any truth. Anything below 200 will lead to a confusion. Below 200, everything is upside down. Good seems evil, evil seems good. Also, all these greedy people that cause so much problems, they're all below 200 because greed is still better, or still feels better, than shame, guilt, and fear, where all problems stem from. So the first step is to get beyond the 200 threshold. The second step is to get beyond the 400 threshold, which is a lot. It's double. This is called awakening in many traditions. Like this channel also, this channel used to be called What is Awakening and Wake Up? Now it's called Shores of Infinity. For this reason, this is the first necessary step to have an inkling of what is actually going on, of what truth might be, of what consciousness might be. And because it used to be so rare, it used to be 1 in half a million who got to 400 plus. Now it's much more likely. But because it used to be so unlikely, this got confused with enlightenment a lot. Many people who went to 400 plus thought, okay, that must be enlightenment. And that's what they propagated and told others. But it's not. It's just the first step. It's the beginning of human adulthood. The next big threshold is 500. 500 is love. That is one of the reasons why I call it the love stage. There is a stage between awakening and enlightenment, which I call the love stage, because that is when you feel, when you're able to receive and sense and feel and experience universal love or divine love or unconditional love. It's not that needy love that we usually know. All these scales, when they get presented, they lead to many, many misunderstandings. And I thought for a long time if I should talk about this scale, but now I do it. Everyone is responsible for him or herself. So one of the misunderstandings is that whenever you experience love and joy, you're on the scale 500 plus. That's not true. It depends on what kind of love and joy. Love and joy, cosmic love and joy, unconditional, impersonal, then yes. In spiral dynamics, another scale, I've talked about it a lot. This love phase is more or less equal to spiral dynamics teal or violet in Ken Wilber terms. It's a great time, a great experience where everything feels like it's opening up, it's expanding. You suddenly understand what is meant with what many mystical teachers have said, that everything is love, everything is the divine love, like the Sufis always expound upon. And then the next big step is level 600, calibration 600 on the scale from 0 to 1000. 600, beep, calls it peace. I would call it non-duality. In Meher Baba's terms, it's the first half of enlightenment. And again, people who get there usually think, okay, that's it. That is the highest level that can possibly be reached. There's nothing after that, which is not true. There's still much after that. So 600 is already partly enlightened. And this is, again, what many people think enlightenment is. Has something to do with an intense peace and neutrality and to accept everything how it is. And this is where the last remnants of the personality fall away and get replaced by intuition and some higher inexplicable force. Many non-dual teachers actually are there, but the problem is that they misunderstand the finality of this state. I made a video a few months ago. Is enlightenment final? No, it's not. It starts with 600 plus. The next big step is 700. 700 is full enlightenment. That is what Meher Baba and Aurobindo and beep call full enlightenment. That is what in most Indian traditions is referred to as enlightenment or enlightened. This is very, 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 very rare. 1 in 10 million maybe. Very rare. And it is something that has not been described much. Bernadette Roberts described it very well. And it has, to get there you have to sacrifice a lot. You have to really give up everything. And become a willing servitor of the divine consciousness, as the mother would put it. At any given time in the illusion of linear time, there are only a handful of people who are at or beyond 700. It's super rare. And again, that is usually where there's a stop. It's unimaginable that there's anything beyond that. And whatever is beyond that is very scary. The divine void, the infinite, the absolute. Meher Baba describes it as some kind of abyss that you might glimpse. A light so pure and intense that you fear annihilation. Also, Carlos Castaneda talks about an abyss, about another world even. That is beyond 700. So I could stop here for today, but there's actually one more threshold that needs to be mentioned, which is 800 plus. 800 plus is what is called in Indian traditions the avatar level. Now, there are some teachers that are so influential, the usual suspects like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and so on. And they were so influential because they reached 800 plus. And this is what I call beyond enlightenment. It's beyond enlightenment. It's impossible to put it into words. I have not been there, so I can't describe it. But there were some people, also like Meher Baba and Aurobindo, who I believe went there, and it seems that it's very difficult to maintain. The thing about these states is always, are they abiding? Do they last, or are they only a few moments or days or weeks? And to stay beyond 700 or even beyond 800 seems to be very, very, very difficult. And most people don't do it. Those few who reach there, they usually go back on purpose, voluntarily, to other stages. often to the 500 plus stage because that's the most comfortable. We talked about scales recently, so I've made a lot of videos about spiral dynamics. This is the second scale of consciousness I'm talking about, and there's a third I will talk about in the future. The finder scale, but until then remember that fear is a big obstacle as well as shame and guilt. Always look out for those three: fear, shame and guilt. And courage is the way out of it. Courage is 200 plus. Awakening is 400 plus. Awakening means the realization that you are not your personality, that there's something vaster inside of you, or not of you, there's something vaster which expresses itself as you. And then there's the 500 plus, which is the point of no return. Once you're there, you cannot fall back below 200 again. You've glimpsed something that can only be described as consciousness or infinite or absolute. But neither awakening nor love are enlightenment already, but have been described as such because in a religious context it makes sense. Many religions, this empathy and love and compassion, they're hailed as enlightenment, but they're actually the love phase, which is a good place to be. It's a very good place to be, probably the best, the most comfortable, the most enjoyable. And within this love phase there are several substations that are also quite interesting, that also feel, for the one who experiences it, very different. So lastly, the question for today: how do I know? It's of course a measuring tool for yourself, not for others. How do I know on which scale, calibration I am? It's very hard to measure this yourself. Beep describes this in his books, the titles of which I'm not allowed to mention here, how it works, how the whole thing works, and how to calibrate. It's similar to kinesiology, and just as in kinesiology, the problem is to be neutral. You can only do this calibration if you're absolutely neutral, if you don't want anything, if you're in a state of wu wei, of not wanting. Because our ego always wants to be the best, wants to be good at something. And it's a very, very popular spiritual bypass to think you're on a higher color or higher calibration or higher stage or whatever. So your ego will always try to persuade you that you're very high up the scale. The more insecure you are, the more your ego will tell you that actually you're very special and you're very high up. So the most difficult calibration is your own. So to practice, it's better to do it with others first, with their consent, of course. Or maybe ask someone else to calibrate you. Of course, this scale has already found its way into spiral dynamics green and is misused a lot for all kinds of funny purposes. But it's still a very good tool for those who can handle it. It appeals to our logic to have a scale from 0 to 1000. Our mind can imagine this very well. Beep was originally a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and medical doctors often like to measure things on a scale from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. And I personally think he just expanded it to have it more detailed from 0 to 1000. But to do the calibration, you have to be beyond the subjective to some degree. So I think it works really well if you're yourself on the scale at 500 plus. It starts to work at 400 plus, and it works really well at 500 plus and 600 plus. Below 400, it's prone to mistakes. And many people who use it nowadays, they're around 300, so they don't really have the tools to use it. It's still very interesting though. And it's not judgmental. It's not, of course, the mind always wants to say, okay, I'm high up the scale, you're low up the scale and whatever. It's not like that. It's just a description tool. And if you feel special or better because you're higher up on the scale, you are not higher up on the scale. It's not that you're better than anyone else because you are at a different level. It's just the frequencies. Again, like colors, like colors of the visible spectrum. One color is not better than another color. It's just different. You can just receive a different frequency, a different level of completeness. You can see more details. You can see more puzzle pieces. And thus, at some point, maybe the whole puzzle. But to be at 500 or 600 or 700 doesn't feel special. It just feels normal. It's, as Jet McKenna puts it so well, human adulthood. Human adulthood is our birthright. It's nothing special. It's where we all should be. Okay. Tell me what you think or what your experiences are. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me as a Patreon. Thank you for liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell button. And see you soon.